Tax Talk. It's your favorite host, Qudisah Muhammad, here with my loyal assistant,
co-host,
Marcus Aceves-Lewis, and here with us today we have Miss Drisdale with the 2020 census. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. My first question is, can you explain what the 3/5 compromise is and how it affected the census?
Sure, and thank you all so much for having me.
Thank you for coming.
Yes, of course. So the 3/5 compromise was a way to count slaves, happened in about 1787, and it was basically a solution for the southern states to allow, out of every 5 slaves, 3 were counted as a whole person on the census. So you can imagine the lack of representation for African Americans back in this time, and that's what the 3/5 compromise was.
Wow. So only 3 out of 5 slaves count as one person. So a whole slave would not even be a single person, basically.
Exactly. In the southern states, they did this for obviously the political power in the House of Representatives,
Right.
but also for tax purposes.
Right.
Oh my goodness.
Yes.
Okay. What change do you think could be brought about if census numbers from certain people groups, specifically colored people groups, if they were to increase? What do you think could happen?
Well, I think that the census is a good way for even, young people as yourself to begin to get into your civic duty and a little bit into politics, because it really is a simple concept. We do the count every 10 years, and based on this count, there's federal funding and political power that's tied to the census. So I believe that if what we call hard to count populations, if those populations were to respond in the 2020 census, that would directly turn into federal funding, dollars, resources, and political power for these communities that may feel underserved, underseen, or maybe lack those resources. So here in Houston, we think about Third Ward, where we are now,
Right.
Greens Point, the Gulfton area. Just imagine if those people were empowered with this information and with this knowledge and the federal funding that could come back for things like road construction and education and even hospitals and medical clinics.
Right.
So I think that there's a direct tie to improvement and betterment in those communities if they were to respond in the 2020 census. And it is a simple concept for anyone to understand if you're trying to, I guess, get more involved in politics and civic duty.
So let's talk a little bit about redistricting and how that goes hand in hand with the census.
So basically, redistricting is a way for us, for local governments to kind of revise geographic areas in their community to determine how representation is kind of delegated out, I guess I could say. So basically, when the census does our population count every 10 years, we give that information to our local state governments for them to redraw the districts. So based on how these district lines are drawn in the population count, ideally the districts are supposed to be equal. They're supposed to get the same amount of people.
Right.
And basically all the Bureau does is deliver this information to the governments, and it's up to the governments to redraw the lines. So we think about things like the House of Representatives, I mean, even your school board and city council, all of that is tied to the redrawing of these district lines. So that's why it's so important. Of course, the billions of dollars in federal funding, but also the political representation in your local community and who represents you and what they stand for, and if it aligns with your family and with the things that you believe.
I think going back to the misrepresentation of certain underprivileged areas and groups among the United States, how could we get like the word out and have more people, honestly, how do you get to the US Census? How can you, make sure that you are represented to do that?
That is a very good question. We live in, as you all know, the world's most diverse city. So our local team of partnership specialists, that's what I am. I basically go out into the community and I try to get organizations like TAPS, TSU, or even a church to endorse and talk about the census to their members or students. So during the 2020 census, our approach has been very grassroots. We are uncovering every rock, we're talking to every person, and we're just going into it with the attitude that no community, no group is too small or too big for us to tap into.
Exactly.
So myself, I work among higher ed. So I work with U of H and TSU and San Jacinto College to try to get the students invigorated and excited about the census. But we have someone that does like LGBTQ, and she finds creative ways to get that audience excited. We have someone that directly is tied to people experiencing homelessness.
So you're covering all the bases.
Right.
That's
so
perfect.
Houston is super diverse, and we just have to figure out where each of the people like me would go to reach all of the communities.
Absolutely.
I hope that makes sense.
That
makes perfect sense.
That makes
Yeah,
perfect
it's
sense.
perfect.
Thank you. Wow.
Okay.
So my next question is, does gentrification happen at all because of the census? And if so, are there any negative effects of this?
I would say that I don't believe gentrification happens because of the census directly. I think that there are a lot of factors that tie into what neighborhoods will be gentrified. However, the data that the census does collect is used by real estate developers, businesses, banks to determine, okay, we want to put a McDonald's here, or we want to put lofts at the corner of Emancipation and Elgin. They directly use and look at the information that we gather to say, okay, we have so many people in this area that may make this amount of money or this race, and this race typically goes to this type of business, if that basically makes sense.
Yeah.
So I don't think that the census is fueling gentrification. We literally just create the statistics. We gather the information. So even the employment rates that we've been seeing in the news so much recently, they're looking at the census data. We don't create those reports, but they use that data to say, okay, well, we'll make the determination of what the unemployment is and other statistics that are important to us.
Right.
And to answer the second part, of course, there can be negative aspects of gentrification, but like I said, we really try not to, we're nonpartisan. We try not to get into the politics of anything. We just deliver the numbers that count.
Right. Okay.
Perfect. Do you think that there is any sort of correlation between more people of color that are counted in the U.S. Census and more diversity in Congress?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Because I know that with the redrawing of the district lines and deciding what representatives represent that community, I know it's important that the community feels reflected in the person that they see in Congress. So I believe that as more people of color or more underprivileged people begin to get counted and their voices are heard, I believe and I hope that that would translate into more representation and those values in Congress.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Are there any cities or states that are suspected of having grossly misrepresented populations?
I wouldn't say grossly misrepresented, but if we think about cities or areas that are highly dense, lots of population, maybe lots of young people, and where there's been a lot of population increase, the information that we're going off of is based off the 2010 census. So come 2020, those numbers are going to look a lot different, especially here in Texas, where we have a great population of Hispanic residents. So any area where we've seen a lot of development, a lot of young people have moved there, and where there has been a population increase, will definitely need to be updated with the most current census data. That's why it's so important that as young people, we get involved, we fill out our census. And even if you all as students can't be counted on your own, you can remind your parent or remind your head of household, hey, make sure we're counted, make sure I'm included.
Right.
And how do you think about undocumented citizens? Like, how do they work into the whole census?
Well, they've definitely been a challenge that keeps us all up at night, is how do we reach these people? And even when we reach them, how do we get them to actually do it and trust us? So we definitely have been partnering with a lot of organizations here in town that directly administer to that population in some way, whether that's child care or resources and food or immigration or religious building. We try to go through them, get them to believe and endorse the census, and if they can say, hey, it's safe, your answers will not be shared. ICE is not going to come looking for you if you respond. You're not going to lose your job, or the leasing office isn't going to put you out because there are more people on the census form than on your leasing application. That's not the case. We need people to know that it's safe to respond and why it's so important to respond. And a lot of the communities that don't respond are the communities that need those resources. We talk about everything from food stamps, CHIP, even the federal Pell Grant that a lot of my college students, I know I did when I was in college, took advantage of. That's tied directly to census data. However, if these communities don't respond, they technically don't exist, to the federal, to our state, our local governments when it's time to, allocate those federal fundings. You didn't get counted, so why would we send that funding to your community if you're not there?
All right, thank you so much for your time here today. A sort of a final thought, a final word for our viewers. What do you want to leave with them today?
Absolutely. If you're watching and you haven't been counted, you can go to my2020census.gov right now and get counted. It's about 10 questions, should take you about 10 minutes, and you impact the next 10 years. It really is that simple. For all of my youth, go and check and with your parents and make sure that the household has been counted. You can always go to census.gov to read more information about the census. We do surveys all around the year. This is just our biggest one, so get involved. It's your civic duty. Let's get counted. Let's get those dollars, that representation, back to the communities, to the people that need it the most. And thank y'all so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being here.
It was great.
Hey everybody, thank you once again for joining us here at Tapstock. I am your host, Aceves-Lewis. This is my co-host, Qudisah Muhammad. We spoke today with Ms. Drisdale about the importance of the US Census. I highly encourage that you take a part of this census. It is so important to get represented in your community around America. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I hope you enjoyed this week's segment.